the summer of 1994, I was working as a Forest Service patrolman in the Blue Mountains of northeastern Oregon. The days were filled with routine tasks, inspecting trails, ensuring campers adhered to regulations, and monitoring wildlife. But one afternoon, everything changed. I decided to venture into a remote area known among locals as the Goldilocks Zone. This region, nestled between 5,000 to 7,000 feet in elevation, had garnered attention over the years due to numerous Bigfoot sightings. Equipped with my camera and a sense of curiosity, I set out alone, eager to document the diverse wildlife. As I delved deeper into the forest, I began to notice anomalies. Branches bent at odd angles, large footprints embedded in the soft earth, and patches of flattened grass. Initially, I attributed these signs to bears, but something felt different. The tracks were too large, the disturbances too deliberate. Pushing forward, I entered a dense thicket where the towering trees seemed to close in around me. The usual symphony of forest sounds, chirping birds, rustling leaves, was conspicuously absent. An unsettling silence enveloped the area, heightening my senses. Suddenly, a series of knocks resonated through the trees. 3 distinct raps, sharp and deliberate. My heart skipped a beat. I had heard stories of such sounds being attributed to Bigfoot, but I dismissed them as folklore. Yet in that moment, doubt began to creep in. Compelled by a mix of skepticism and intrigue, I moved toward the source of the sound. As I rounded a bend, I saw it. A massive, upright figure moving gracefully between the trees. It stood over 7 feet tall, its body covered in dark, matted hair. Its gait was deliberate, each step measured. I raised my camera, hands trembling, trying to focus. Through the lens, I saw deep-set eyes, a pronounced brow ridge, and a face that seemed both human and animal. The creature paused, sensing my presence, then turned its head slowly to meet my gaze. A chill ran down my spine as our eyes locked. The creature emitted a low, guttural growl, a sound that vibrated in my chest. It took a step toward me, and I instinctively took a step back, my heart pounding in my ears. Suddenly, it let out a series of high-pitched whoops, echoing through the forest. The sound was unlike anything I had ever heard, both haunting and primal. Without warning, the creature turned and loped into the forest, its movements fluid and swift. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what had just occurred. The forest slowly returned to its natural state, birds resuming their songs, the wind rustling through the leaves. I reviewed the footage on my camera, but the images were shaky, the creature barely visible. I had no definitive proof, just the lingering image of those deep-set eyes and the haunting sounds echoing in my mind. Over the years, I've shared this story with many. Some believe, others don't. But that day in the Blue Mountains remains etched in my memory. I may never have concrete evidence, but I know what I saw. The Blue Mountains continue to be a hotspot for Bigfoot sightings. Every year, numerous alleged encounters are reported, with enthusiasts dedicating significant time to investigate. Despite extensive research, no conclusive evidence has been found to prove Bigfoot's existence. Yet the legends persist, fueled by personal experiences and the vast, unexplored wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. As for me, I remain uncertain. The logical side seeks evidence, seeks answers, but the part of me that ventured into those mountains knows what I saw. And perhaps that's all that matters. There are places in the wilderness that man was never meant to tread, places where something else reigns, something ancient, something watching. If I had known what we were walking into that weekend, I would have turned back the moment we left the truck. But some lessons you only learn when it's too late. It was supposed to be a simple hunting trip. 3 days in the Cascade Mountains, surrounded by nothing but endless trees and crisp mountain air. Just me, my brother Jake, and our friend Travis. We had done trips like this before, tracking elk, camping under the stars, cracking beers by the fire. It was our escape from the noise of the world, a chance to test ourselves against the wild. But from the very beginning, something felt off. The moment we stepped out of the truck, a heavy silence hung over the forest. Normally, you hear birds, the rustling of small animals, the wind shifting through the canopy. But this time, nothing. Just a dead, unnatural quiet. Jake made a joke about us scaring the animals off, but I saw the way he glanced over his shoulder. He felt it too. Travis laughed it off, saying we were just getting inside our own heads. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't fear, at least not yet. It was a feeling, a pressure in the air, like we were being watched. Shrugging off the unease, we hiked deep into the woods, following a trail we had used in the past. The deeper we went, the more that feeling grew. The trees felt taller, their trunks impossibly thick, their shadows stretching like fingers. Even the air smelled different, earthy and damp, but underneath it, something else. Something sour, like rotting meat carried on the wind. By late afternoon, we reached our usual campsite, a small clearing near a narrow stream. As we set up our tents, I noticed something strange. The undergrowth around our site was flattened in places, like something heavy had passed through recently. Large patches of dirt had been disturbed, but there were no clear tracks. It was as if something had been moving, watching, just beyond where we could see. Probably a bear, Jake muttered, eyeing the ground. But I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Travis, ever the skeptic, shrugged. Whatever it was, it's gone now. Let's get that fire going. As the sun set, the feeling of unease refused to fade. The woods around us were still too quiet, and every now and then I thought I saw movement between the trees. Just a flicker of shadow, gone when I turned to look. We sat around the fire, eating and sharing stories like we always did. But the laughter felt forced, the conversation never quite breaking the tension. And then just as the fire crackled low, I heard it. A branch snapping. Close. The three of us froze, eyes darting to the darkness beyond the firelight. I held my breath, ears straining for any sound. Seconds passed. Nothing. Probably just a deer, Travis whispered, but his voice lacked confidence. I wanted to believe him. I really did. That night, as I lay in my sleeping bag, I felt it again, that unbearable sensation of being watched. The longer I listened, the more certain I became. Just beyond our tent, something was breathing. Deep, slow, heavy. I clenched my eyes shut, gripping the knife under my pillow, praying for sleep to take me. But deep down, I already knew we were not alone. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Jake cursing under his breath. I sat up groggy, my muscles stiff from a restless night. When I unzipped the tent, I saw what had him so rattled. Massive footprints, bigger than any man's, bigger than a bear's, leading from the tree line, circling our tents, then vanishing back into the forest. Tell me that's a joke, I muttered. Travis, usually the first to brush things off, was quiet. He knelt next to one of the prints, running his fingers through the deep impression in the dirt. Whatever made these, he said slowly, was standing here, watching us. We spent the day hunting, but the eerie quiet never lifted. By noon, we stumbled upon something even worse, a deer carcass torn apart. Not eaten, just destroyed. Bones shattered, flesh peeled away in strips, its head twisted at an unnatural angle. Cougar? Jake suggested, but his voice was tight. I shook my head. No animal kills for sport like that. As night fell, the unease in my gut turned to dread. We kept the fire burning high, our rifles within reach. The sounds began just after midnight. Footsteps, heavy, slow, pacing just beyond the glow of the fire. Then a low guttural growl. Deep, unnatural. Jake and I grabbed our rifles, scanning the darkness. The footsteps stopped. Silence. And then the scream. It tore through the forest, primal and deafening. A howl, but not from any wolf or coyote I'd ever heard. It was deep and resonant, echoing through the trees, shaking me to my core. Then we saw it. A figure stepped into the firelight, towering over us. 8, maybe 9 feet tall. Thick, matted fur covered its massive body, but its face was almost human. Glowing red eyes burned into me, its mouth curled into a grimace, or a grin. Then it lunged. Chaos erupted. Jake fired first, the gunshot splitting the night. The creature recoiled, but didn't fall. Instead, it let out a guttural snarl and swiped at a tree, its claws raking deep into the bark like it was paper. Run, Travis shouted. We didn't hesitate. We tore through the woods, the sound of crashing branches and heavy breathing close behind us. My lungs burned, my legs screaming as we sprinted toward the truck. Then suddenly, silence. I risked a glance back. The creature stood at the tree line, its glowing eyes the last thing I saw before we sped away, leaving that cursed place behind. We never spoke of it again. We never went back. Some things should be left alone. Some places don't want to be found. Some trails aren't meant to be walked. I learned this the hard way, and I barely made it out to tell the tale. It was late September when my cousin Mark and I decided to take one last camping trip before the cold really set in. We had spent the past few summers exploring the deep forests of northern Washington, pushing further into the wilderness each time. Mark was the adventurous type. He always wanted to see what was beyond the next ridge, down the next valley. I liked the thrill too, but I was always more cautious. This time, I should have listened to my instincts. Mark had found an old, half-faded map online showing a forgotten trail deep in the Olympic National Forest. It wasn't marked on any of the newer maps, and that intrigued him. "No one's been out here in decades," he said with a grin. "This is real wilderness." That phrase stuck with me, real wilderness. The first day was uneventful. The forest was dense, filled with towering pines and moss-covered boulders. The deeper we went, the quieter it became. It wasn't just that we didn't see other hikers. We didn't hear birds, didn't see squirrels. The whole forest felt abandoned. Mark joked that we had stepped into another world, that we were explorers mapping uncharted land. I didn't laugh. That night, we made camp near a small creek. The fire crackled, the only sound in the vast emptiness. We talked, cooked some canned food, and eventually settled into our tents. That was the last normal moment of the trip. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. Something had snapped a branch outside. It wasn't the quick rustling of a raccoon or the light steps of a deer. It was heavy, deliberate. I held my breath, straining my ears. Then another snap. Closer, closer. I whispered, "Mark." No response. I slowly reached for my flashlight, heart hammering, and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees just beyond our tents. Nothing, but the feeling of being watched was unbearable. The air felt thick, oppressive. Then, just as I was about to turn the light off, a shape. Tall, massive, just beyond the reach of the light. It moved, a slow, shifting movement, like something trying to decide whether to come closer or slip away. The outline was wrong, too broad, too tall for a person. My hands were shaking. I didn't blink. Then it was gone, just gone. I must have fallen asleep out of exhaustion, because the next thing I knew, it was morning. I convinced myself I had imagined it. A trick of shadows, sleep deprivation, anything but the truth. Then I saw Mark outside staring at something on the ground. His face was pale. Footprints. They weren't human. They were huge, twice the size of my own, deep impressions in the dirt. And they weren't from a bear. The shape was wrong, too long, too defined. "Let's get out of here," I said. Mark hesitated. "We should at least..." "No, now." Something had been watching us, circling our camp, and it wasn't done. We packed up fast, barely speaking. As we made our way back, the woods felt different. The silence wasn't just unsettling, it was oppressive. The trees seemed darker, the air heavier, and then the smell hit us. Rot. Something dead. Something rotting. We kept walking, but the feeling of being followed never left. Every so often we heard something. Branches shifting, heavy steps, something keeping pace with us. Mark, usually the brave one, was white-knuckled on his hunting knife. I had my bear spray clutched so tight my fingers ached. Then, the worst moment of my life. We turned a bend in the trail, and it was there. Standing in the middle of the path just 50 feet ahead. 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Thick, shaggy fur, dark and matted. Arms too long, hanging low, hands curled into loose fists. But the face was almost human. Almost. Its eyes locked onto us, intelligent, curious, angry. Mark whispered, "Don't run." But I could barely breathe. The creature took one slow step forward. The weight of it made the ground tremble. Then another step. Then from somewhere behind us, another noise, another one. We were surrounded. I don't remember making the decision. I just ran. Mark ran too. We crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping our faces, roots threatening to trip us. Behind us, heavy footsteps, fast, too fast. They were chasing us. Then a scream. Not human, not animal, something else. The footsteps stopped, silence, just like before. We didn't stop. We ran until our lungs burned, until we reached the truck and peeled out of there so fast we nearly crashed. We never spoke about it again. Not really. Mark tried to joke about it months later. Mark said we must have just been tired, hallucinating. But I saw it in his eyes. He knew. Something was out there, and it didn't want us on that trail.